She arrived just before dusk, when the estate seemed to hold its breath between day and night. The carriage wheels slowed over the gravel drive, each crunch echoing louder than it should have, as if announcing her presence to a house that did not care to receive strangers. The estate was larger than she had imagined, impossibly so. Its tall windows reflected the fading sky like watchful eyes, and the stone facade carried an air of quiet authority. This was not a place where people like her belonged. It was a place where they worked, passed through, and were forgotten. She folded her gloved hands in her lap to still them. Temporary, she reminded herself. This position was temporary. A few weeks, perhaps a month at most, until the household no longer required her services. She had learned not to attach herself to places that could never be hers. The carriage stopped. A servant opened the door before she could gather her thoughts further. "Miss," he said with a polite inclination of his head. She stepped down carefully, her boots meeting the gravel with a soft crunch. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of trimmed hedges and distant rain. Somewhere, a clock chimed the hour. Inside, the house was quieter than expected. Not lifeless, never that, but controlled. Every movement felt measured, every sound absorbed into thick carpets and high ceilings. She was led through long corridors where portraits lined the walls, their painted subjects watching her with distant, unimpressed expressions. "The Duke is rarely in residence," the housekeeper informed her as they walked. The woman's tone was not unkind, but it was firm, practiced. "And when he is, he does not care for disturbances. You will perform your duties and keep to your assigned areas." "Yes, of course," she replied. "The household runs efficiently," the housekeeper continued. "It is expected that you will do the same." "I understand." And she did. Efficiency meant invisibility. It meant doing one's work so well that no one thought to question your presence. It was a skill she had perfected over years. Her room was small but clean, tucked into a quieter wing of the house. A narrow bed, a writing desk, a window overlooking the gardens. It was more than she had expected, and yet it still did not feel like hers. Nothing ever did. She unpacked only what was necessary. There was no reason to settle in further. By the time she finished, the last of the daylight had begun to fade. The sky beyond her window deepened into shades of blue and grey, and the estate seemed to shift with it, becoming something softer, more uncertain. Restless, she stepped out into the corridor, unsure whether she was permitted to wander but unwilling to remain confined. The house felt too large to sit still in, its silence pressing in on her thoughts. She found her way outside almost without realizing it. The gardens stretched farther than she could see in the dimming light. Paths curved between hedges and trees, carefully arranged yet somehow wild at the edges. It was quieter here than inside. No distant footsteps, no murmured voices. Only the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of something unseen. She followed one of the paths, her steps slow, deliberate. The tension she had carried with her since her arrival began to ease, if only slightly. "You are new." The voice came from behind her. She turned, startled, but not frightened. The man standing a few paces away did not look like a threat. He stood with an ease that suggested he belonged here, though not in the rigid way of the servants. There was something else in his posture, something unspoken, controlled. "I am," she said after a moment. "I arrived this evening." He studied her, not rudely, but with a kind of quiet attention that made her more aware of herself than she would have liked. "You should have been told not to wander," he said. "I was told many things," she replied, her voice calm. "But not all of them seemed necessary to obey." For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. Or amusement. "Is that so?" She held his gaze, refusing to retreat under it. "I don't believe a garden can be disturbed simply by being walked through." "No," he said slowly. "I suppose it cannot." There was a pause. Not an awkward one, but not entirely comfortable either. It stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "You work in the house?" he asked. "Yes." "And you find yourself wandering on your first evening?" "I find myself breathing," she corrected gently. "The house is quieter than I expected." "That is one way to describe it." She tilted her head slightly. "And how would you describe it?" "Deliberate," he said after a moment. Everything here is exactly as it is meant to be. She considered that. That sounds rather suffocating. Another flicker of something in his expression, this time unmistakably amusement. You are not afraid to speak your mind. Should I be? Most would be. I am not most. No, he agreed softly. You are not. The word settled between them in a way she did not fully understand. She became aware, suddenly, of how easily the conversation had unfolded. Of how little she knew about him, and how little he had offered. And you? She asked. Do you always question new arrivals in the garden? Only the ones who ignore instructions. She almost smiled. Then I suppose I should apologize for disappointing expectations. I am not disappointed. There was something in the way he said it, quiet, certain, that made her glance at him again. His gaze had not left her. It was not invasive, but it was steady, intent. She found herself looking away first. I should return, she said, more to break the moment than from any real urgency. As you wish. She hesitated. I did not catch your name. He seemed to consider the question for a fraction too long. You may call me sir, he said at last. It was an odd answer. Not incorrect, but not complete. Very well, sir. The word felt unfamiliar on her tongue, carrying more weight than it should have. And you? He asked. She gave her name. He repeated it once, quietly, as if committing it to memory. You should be careful, he added, almost as an afterthought. In the garden. In this house. She frowned slightly. That sounds like a warning. Perhaps it is. From what? His gaze held hers again, that same unreadable intensity beneath its calm surface. From misunderstanding where you stand. Something about the way he said it unsettled her, not with fear, but with a kind of awareness she could not quite name. I know exactly where I stand, she said, more firmly than she felt. Do you? The question lingered, unanswered. She turned before she could respond, making her way back toward the house. She did not look over her shoulder, though she could feel his gaze following her until she disappeared through the doors. Inside, the silence felt different. He remained in the garden long after she had gone. The faintest hint of a smile touched his expression, not one of amusement, but of quiet certainty. He had not expected her. But now that she was here, there was no question in his mind. She would not leave his world unchanged. And, whether she understood it yet or not, she would not leave it at all. The next few days settled into a rhythm that was as structured as the house itself, and just as deceptive. She learned her duties quickly. It was expected. Observing, adjusting, anticipating needs before they were spoken, these were skills she carried with her long before she arrived at the estate. The household ran with an efficiency that bordered on precision, and she fit into it as seamlessly as she always did. Yet something about this place resisted complete understanding. It was not just the silence, though, that lingered in every corridor. Nor was it the unseen presence of the Duke, whose absence seemed to shape the household more than his presence ever could. It was something subtler, something that revealed itself in fragments. And most often, it revealed itself in him. She saw him again the following evening. Not by accident, she suspected, though she could not prove it. He stood near the far end of the garden this time, as if he had always been there and she had simply failed to notice. The fading light caught the edges of his figure, outlining him against the darkening hedges. You have a habit of appearing without warning, she said as she approached. And you have a habit of returning, he replied. I was told the garden was not forbidden. It is not. Then I see no reason to avoid it. His gaze lingered on her, thoughtful. No, he said. I suppose you do not. There was a quiet understanding between them now, not familiarity, not quite, but something that made their conversations feel less like chance encounters and more like continuations. You work diligently, he observed after a moment. She raised an eyebrow. You have been watching. I observe what is within my view. And I have been within your view often enough to form an opinion. Often enough. She considered that, unsure whether to be unsettled or indifferent. And what opinion have you formed? That you do not waste effort, he said. But neither do you give more than necessary. That sounds like criticism. It is not. Then what is it? Recognition. She looked at him more carefully then. There was no mockery in his tone, no condescension. If anything, there was something almost measured about it, as though he were assessing something he intended to understand completely. You speak as though you know me, she said. I know what I have seen. That is not the same thing. No, he agreed. It is not. A pause followed, softer this time. And yet, he added, it is often enough. She did not respond immediately. There was a weight to his words, not heavy, but present. It made her aware, again, of how easily he seemed to see through what others overlooked. It should have made her cautious. Instead, it made her curious. Their conversations became a quiet pattern after that. Not regular enough to be predictable, but frequent enough that she began to expect them. Always in the garden. Always at that hour when the house seemed to loosen its hold on structure and allow something less rigid to exist. He never spoke of himself beyond what was necessary. When she asked, he answered just enough to satisfy the question without revealing anything of substance. And what is it that you do here, sir? She asked one evening. I ensure that things remain as they should be. That sounds rather vague. It is meant to be. She exhaled lightly. You avoid questions with remarkable skill. And you ask them with equal persistence. Someone must. Must they? If one intends to understand anything. He regarded her for a moment, then said quietly, understanding is not always as valuable as you believe. And ignorance is preferable. Sometimes. She shook her head faintly. I cannot agree with that. No, he said. I did not expect you to. There was something almost approving in his tone. It unsettled her more than disagreement would have. Still, there were moments, small ones, that disrupted the careful balance of their interactions. Once, as they walked along a narrower path, a servant appeared at the far end. The moment his eyes fell on the man beside her, his posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. A fraction straighter. A fraction more attentive. Sir, the servant said, bowing his head briefly. The man acknowledged him with the slightest inclination, nothing more. But it was enough. The servant did not look at her again as he passed. She slowed her steps once they were alone again. That was not the manner of someone addressing an equal, she said. No, he replied calmly. Then what was it? Habit. Whose? His. She studied him, but his expression revealed nothing. You are not what you appear to be, she said quietly. A faint smile touched his lips. And what do I appear to be? Someone with less authority than he actually possesses. That is a curious conclusion. It is an observant one. Is it? Yes. He held her gaze for a moment longer than usual, then said, And what would you do with that observation? I have not decided. Then perhaps you should take care not to decide too quickly. There it was again, that subtle warning, wrapped in calm words. You speak as though I am in danger, she said. Not in danger, he replied. But not as free as you believe. She frowned. I am well aware of my position. Are you? I am employed here. Temporarily. I understand exactly what that means. And yet you walk the grounds as though you belong to them. I walk where I am permitted. That is not the same thing. She stopped then, turning to face him fully. And what is it you think I misunderstand? She asked, her voice steady. For a moment, he said nothing. His gaze moved over her, not critically, not dismissively, but with a kind of focus that made the air between them feel sharper. Nothing that cannot be corrected, he said at last. The answer was unsatisfying, and yet, strangely, it lingered. She did not press further. But she did not forget it either. Days passed. Then more. And with them came a shift she could not ignore. It was not in what he said, but in what he did not say. There were moments when his attention lingered too long. Moments when his gaze held something deeper than curiosity, something more deliberate. It was not overt, not improper. But it was there. Constant. Quiet. Unyielding. She became aware of it in ways she could not easily dismiss. One evening, as they stood closer than usual beneath the low branches of an old tree, the space between them felt different. Narrower. Charged. "You should not look at me like that," she said before she could stop herself. "Like what?" "As though you already know something I do not." His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Perhaps I do. That is not fair. Fairness is rarely relevant." She exhaled, frustrated. "You speak in riddles. And yet you understand them." "I understand that you are avoiding clarity." "Clarity would change things." "Would it?" "Yes." She hesitated. There was something in his tone, not forceful, not commanding, but certain. "What would it change?" she asked. "Everything." The word settled between them with quiet finality. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she stepped back, creating distance where there had been none. "I think," she said carefully, "that you overestimate the significance of our conversations." "Do I?" "Yes." "Then why do you continue them?" The question struck deeper than she expected. "I enjoy conversation," she said after a moment. "With anyone?" "No." He took a step closer, not enough to close the distance she had created, but enough to make it feel intentional. "Then do not pretend this is insignificant," he said softly. Her breath caught, not visibly, not enough for him to remark on, but enough for her to notice. She should have ended it then. Stepped away, returned to the house, restored the careful distance she had maintained her entire life. But she did not. And that was the moment everything began to shift. Not dramatically. Not in a way that could be named. But in a way that could not be undone. Because from that point forward, she was no longer simply aware of him. She was aware of how much he saw. And how little he intended to relinquish. And somewhere beneath his calm restraint, beneath the measured words and deliberate silences, there was something else. Something unmistakable. He had not stumbled into these conversations. He had not been drawn into them by chance. He had chosen them. He had chosen her. And though he had not said it, not directly, not yet, there was no uncertainty in him at all. Only patience. And the quiet, unwavering certainty that she would come to understand exactly where she stood. Even if she resisted it. It happened without warning. Not in the garden, not in the quiet half-light where their conversations had always existed outside the rules of the house, but within it. Under chandeliers. Beneath the weight of expectation. She had been summoned to assist at a formal dinner. Not as a guest, of course, never that, but to ensure everything proceeded without disruption. It was the first time the estate had felt truly occupied since her arrival. Voices carried through the halls, footsteps multiplied, and the careful silence of the house gave way to something more rigid. More deliberate. More revealing. She kept her gaze lowered as she moved through the room, attentive but unseen. It was how she preferred it. How she survived. Until she heard it. "Your Grace." The words were not meant for her. They were spoken with practiced respect, directed toward someone seated at the head of the table. Someone she had not yet looked at. She didn't intend to. Not at first. But something, some instinct she could not name, made her glance up. And everything shifted. He sat there as though he had always belonged there. Because he had. The man she knew only as Sir did not look different. Not truly. His expression was the same, composed, controlled, unreadable to anyone who did not know where to look. But now the room aligned around him. Every movement, every voice, every glance bent, subtly, inevitably, toward his presence. Authority did not rest on him. It emanated from him. The Duke. The realization did not come slowly. It struck all at once, sharp and undeniable, unraveling every conversation, every moment, every word he had spoken to her. She had not been speaking to a man outside the structure of the house. She had been speaking to the structure itself. Her breath stilled. Her hands did not tremble, but only because she forced them not to. He did not look at her immediately. That was the worst part. He continued the conversation at the table as though nothing had changed. As though she were not standing there, suddenly aware of her place in a way she had never been before. As though he had not been waiting for this moment. When he finally did look at her, it was brief. Controlled. But there was no apology in it. Only acknowledgement. She looked away first. The rest of the evening passed in a blur she would not remember clearly. Faces, voices, instructions, none of it settled into anything she could hold on to. Only one thought remained, repeating with quiet insistence. He had known. From the beginning. She did not go to the garden that night. Nor the next. Or the one after that. If he noticed her absence, he gave no sign. Of course he didn't. He was the Duke. And she had been foolish enough to forget it. It was not anger that kept her away. Not entirely. It was something sharper. Something more difficult to name. Humiliation. Not because he had deceived her, though he had, but because she had allowed herself to exist freely in his presence. To speak without caution. To forget the rules that governed everything else in her life. And he had let her. Encouraged it. Watched it. She found him on the fourth evening. Not in the garden, but in one of the smaller drawing rooms. The space was dimly lit, quiet in a way that felt deliberate rather than empty. He stood near the window, his posture as composed as ever, as though he had expected her. Of course he had. You knew, she said without preamble. Yes. The single word landed harder than denial would have. You let me speak to you as though you were no one. I let you speak to me as though you were yourself. That is not the same thing. No, he agreed. It is not. Her hands tightened at her sides. You should have told me. Would you have spoken to me the same way if I had? She hesitated. He did not need her answer. That is why, he said quietly. That is not justification. It was not meant to be. Then what was it meant to be? She demanded. Truth, he said. Unfiltered. Unaffected by position. She let out a sharp breath. And what did you gain from that truth? His gaze held hers steadily. Clarity. About what? About you. The answer unsettled her more than anything else he had said. You had no right, she said, her voice lower now but no less firm, to observe me as though I were something to be evaluated. And yet I did. The calmness of it, of him, only sharpened the edge of her anger. You speak as though this changes nothing. It changes everything, he said. Then you understand why I cannot remain here. A pause. Yes. The word surprised her. You will let me leave? She asked. I will not prevent you. It was not quite the same thing. And if I go? His expression did not shift. Then you go. That is all. No. Something in his tone made her still. You will return. The certainty in his voice was not arrogance. It was something far more dangerous. Belief. You presume too much. Do I? Yes. Then prove me wrong. The challenge was quiet. Unyielding. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for something, doubt, perhaps, or hesitation. She found neither. I will leave in the morning, she said. He inclined his head once. As you wish. No attempt to stop her. No attempt to persuade. And somehow, that was worse. Leaving should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like absence. The world beyond the estate was smaller than she remembered. Less precise. Less aware. Days passed. Then more. She tried not to think of him. Of the garden. Of the way he had looked at her, not as though she were beneath him, but as though she were something he had already chosen to understand. That was the part she could not dismiss. He had not treated her as lesser. He had simply never allowed her to forget that he was not. And yet, he had never forced her. Not once. Every conversation, every moment, had been one she could have ended. She simply had not wanted to. The realization came slowly. Uncomfortably. What unsettled her was not that he had power. It was that he had not used it. And still, he had been certain. Of her. Of them. She returned before she could justify it. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because leaving had not been enough to sever what had already taken root. The estate looked the same as it had when she first arrived. Unchanged. Unyielding. But she was not. This time, she did not wander the garden. She went directly to him. He was exactly where she expected him to be. As though he had never doubted. "You came back," he said. It was not a question. Yes. Why? She met his gaze, steady now in a way she had not been before. "Because you were right about one thing," she said. "I did not understand where I stood. And now I do." Silence stretched between them, but it was not the same silence as before. This one held something clearer, sharper, chosen. "You chose for me," she continued, "before I even knew who you were." Yes. The honesty of it no longer surprised her. "That is not something I will accept," she said. "No," he agreed. "It is not something you should." A pause. "Then understand this," she said. "If I remain, it will not be because you decided it. It will be because I did." Something shifted in his expression then, not visibly, not to anyone else. But she saw it. Approval. Relief. Perhaps even something deeper. "Then choose," he said. No command. No pressure. Just the truth of it. And this time, she did. She stayed. Not as something claimed, but as someone who chose to remain despite everything she now understood. Their conversations returned to the garden, but they were no longer shaped by uncertainty. There were no more titles between them. No more illusions. Only two people who had seen each other clearly, and chosen anyway. And in that quiet, deliberate choice, something stronger than power took root.